This is episode 88 with Ajit Nawalkha.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Bryan Teare.
It's your values that drive you, not your goals. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Bryan Teare, and those were the wise words of this week's guest, Ajit Nawalkha. Now, before we get to the episode with Ajit, a shout out to our sponsors. It's the fun guys over at Rooster. Rooster is the audio alarm clock that allows you to wake up to whatever you choose. So you can skip the boring tones that comes standard with your phone and go for something like voice notes from friends and family, inspiring channels like one that I have right on the platform. You can wake up to meditation tracks, news headlines, sports reports, and so much more. You can find it over at Rooster Alarm and Audio Treats, and that's on the Google Play Store or the App Store. Go check it out. Now, on to this week's episode, and I actually decided to split this episode into two separate ones, purely because we touched on two slightly different topics in the interview with Ajit. Now, in case you don't know him, Ajit is an entrepreneur, business coach, founder of EverCoach, and the co-founder of Mindvalley, which is one of the biggest publishers in the personal development space. At 30 years old, Ajit had a dream job as the CEO of a leading company, but in 2014, he made a decision that he needed to live the greatest expression of himself. You see, he'd become successful on the outside, but unfulfilled on the inside. This led Ajit to start putting himself out there more authentically. He created videos, wrote about his beliefs on business, and started working with authors and coaches who he knew had a powerful message. For the first time, it was not about getting rich quick or some hidden agenda. It was about love and about honest conversations. Ajit believes that when it comes to creating a business and a life you love, it's all about doing less and not more, and his methods have been proven to work again and again and again. See, all our life, we're told to set goals and then pursue the next one and the next one and the next one. It's almost like we're trying to catch the horizon or our own shadow. And in this part of the interview, Ajit shares an alternative way of looking at goals where we live powerfully in today. Make sure you come back next week to catch the second half of the interview where we chat all about the coaching world and the coaching profession and how to become a great coach. But in this episode, you're going to learn what to do after achieving your life goal earlier than you'd planned, why you should not set goals just to prove other people wrong, why success does not lead to fulfillment, the three components of smarter goal setting, why you shouldn't set short-term goals and the perfect timeline for doing so, and the critically important exercise to do before setting goals. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at bryanteare.com/088. But for now, guys, let's go hang out with Ajit. Welcome back, everyone, and a big welcome to today's guest. I'm excited to be speaking to Ajit Nawalkha. Ajit, welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback.
I am excited to be here, Bryan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. I've been a big fan of yours for a long time, and I really admire the work that you do. But for people that don't know who you are, why don't you tell us a bit about your Quarter Life story?
Oh, sure. My name's Ajit, of course, and I'm co-founder of a company called Mindvalley and EverCoach, which are basically education-based companies that are trying to change the paradigm of how the world operates and how we operate as human beings and how we can move society in a positive direction forward and how we can support that through education and different forms and ways of educating people, and coaching being one of them. And that's what EverCoach really stands for. That's the vertical that I'm focused on most of the time. So that's kind of my brief introduction to what I do. I don't know if that's exactly what you're looking for right now, Bryan.
Yeah, well, take us back to what things were like in your 20s. I know you came from, you grew up in India, and I know
And
your life goal was, I was actually listening to an interview you did on the Knowledge for Men podcast today. And
Mhm.
I know your life goal was to buy a house for your parents, basically. But what was your life like in your 20s?
So I'll take a little bit before the 20s. I was born in Jaipur. It's a small city in India. It's called the Pink City. It's like the tourist destinations, the colors and the dances and so forth come from that city. So that's where I was born, and I spent first 24 years of my life there. So that's where I've kind of been nurtured. I grew up in a family of 22, which basically meant me, my extended family, which is my grandparents,
Wow.
all the kids of my grandparents, and my grandparents' brother and his whole family used to stay in the same house, which basically meant you never really had something that you can call as privacy or private time or your time. There was nothing like that was there in my early childhood. And I grew up like that, so I learned the lesson of connecting with people at the same time, the value of abundance very early in life, because I didn't have much, right? Because there was no abundance of space, no abundance of time,
Hmm.
because of so many people, and we were not really. We were. I grew up in a humble beginning, so we were not really abundant financially too. So that's how my conditioning happened. But at the same point in time, I had fantastic parents, so they kind of really supported in whatever we wanted to try as kids. They were very supportive of our whatever we wanted to learn, wherever we wanted to go, and whatever they could do, they did do for us. So I was fortunate that way that I had really good parents who would support our journey. So what happened in as I was going to school to college, which was I was about 18, 19 years old, is when I joined this organization called ISEC. It's a student organization that helps internationally students to travel around the world, learning from each other's culture. It was started after World War II to promote more peace in the world. And so I was a part of that organization, and that organization helped me shape my understanding of the world differently to how you would understand the world if you grew up in just India with no exposure to the outside world.
Hmm.
And that exposure kind of shared with me that there is a more possibility that you can imagine and or what you can see around you and your surroundings. And secondly, it gave me the opportunity to really try out some of my ideas. And as I was trying the ideas, I realized that there is there is so much I can do if I would just continue to play a little bit of risk and calculated risk, but still a little bit of risk and try things that were around me. So that's what my 20s looked like. My 20s was where I was in this organization until I was 21. I graduated from my college at that time. Moved on to take a job in a media company. Worked with them for about a year and a half. Started a company with them or invested by them for about a year. From then, kind of tanked it in a way, as it didn't really work out. It was a tech startup, but Facebook came and social networks were kind of clearly dominated by them, and we didn't have superior technology or understanding, to be very honest, of social dynamics at that time. So that kind of happened at that time. And while I was finishing off the year there, uh, my previous company was ready to take me back, but at the same point of time, I was more like I knew I needed to try something different. And one of my interns at this tech startup that we had suggested I look at this company called Mind Valley, which was in Malaysia, a completely different location, but connected to the organization ISEC that I talked about previously. And he said, "Why don't you go check this one out?" And I looked at their website at that time. It didn't look anything like it looks today. But I was like, okay, let me check this out. And still did look really interesting. I didn't understand what they did, but what I did understand was they had great culture and they were
Hmm.
leaders or wanting to be leaders in their field. So I was like, okay, I can try this. I can do it for a year. That's all my intention was at that time, to try it for a year. And I joined the organization. I started as an intern about now it's about 8 years at this point, and actually almost nine now. And I said, okay, 9 years ago, I was there an intern, and about 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I became the co-founder of the company by just starting many companies and making them successful with Mind Valley. And that's been my journey. That's been my journey in my entire 20s. I've just tested, tried in the middle, I quit Mind Valley for a little bit, started a few companies, sold the companies back to Mind Valley, and so forth. Did the whole shenanigans of everything that a person could try, and that's what my story in the 20s was. It was all about saying, what is it that I can try, what is it that I can learn. So even within Mind Valley, for the time that I was in Mind Valley, I played the role of a project manager, I played the role of a brand manager, I played the role of a CTO, I played the role of CMO, I played the role of CEO. I played all the roles that are possible within the company. Pretty much every 12 to 18 months, I would change my role in the company. And I would kind of find a white space and create that role sometimes. And that kind of has been my story of the 20s.
Yeah, and if anyone's not familiar with Mind Valley, first of all, where have you been? But secondly, I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes because everything about it just screams like ideal company to work for. The office space is probably the coolest office space I've ever seen. And I love the fact that you started as an intern and just added value to work your way up. And grew within the company. I think there's a real lesson in that. But I wanted to go back to the story I mentioned that, you said you achieved your life goal at 27. Well, at that stage, it was your life goal. Where do you go after, achieving something you thought would take your whole career to achieve at such a young age?
Well, first you get lost. That's the first thing that happens to you, is that you go, okay, so that's all I really wanted to do. Just to give a backstory, because I don't know if everybody knows, but what happened was that I was, my life goal when I was, imagine somebody who grew up in a family of 22, and with my parents also, and we all sharing the same space and so forth. My biggest goal in life was to buy a house for my parents. And to be able to have them move out of that house and live by themselves and live comfortably and have the abundance of space. And I thought I would take my whole life to be able to do that. And that really was my intention at that time. Only to realize that when you are doing all that I was doing at 27, I could achieve that goal much faster. And at 27 is when I handed the keys to the house that we now live. My parents now live in. I don't, because I'm traveling internationally now, but my parents now live in. I handed over the keys to them, and it was tremendous amount of joy that I was able to do that. But at the same point of time, all of a sudden you feel like you're completely goalless and you're lost, because that was something that you've been dreaming of for 20, 25 years, and you're kind of, you've kind of got there. So where do you go from there? So what happened for me after that is, first it was a big loss of just direction, a big loss of just going, what do I want to do? Until I realized, and this is more recent than initially. Initially, because of the loss of the goal, all it became about was, what can I prove to the world, right? So it wasn't really about buying something per se, but it was a lot about saying and how people see me and what I see in people. And so it was a batch of a couple of years where I was just really arrogant and really, really driven mostly by money, and recognition. And ego. Yeah, a lot about ego. So even if you would meet me, it wouldn't look like I was a very egoistic person, because even when I was driven by ego, I didn't reflect that in my communication. But I was driven a lot by ego, by just pure saying, how do I prove to be bigger than X, Y, and Z, whatever was my comparative measure at that time. And that did create more, growth at that time in my life. But also it created this, if I may, dissatisfaction in life, because as much as, yes, that fuel can drive you, and it can drive you for life if you choose to go that way. There's many wrongs to that, in which you would realize when you would realize, but it is something that drives most of the behavior around the world. So it is something that is a big driver for sure. But what happened for me is I started to realize that how I've become somebody who was driven by these really wrong things, and that would create tremendous amount of dissatisfaction in my life. And I would feel that I am, it's a little hard to explain what really happens to you at that time, because you kind of have to be in that stage to really feel what's happening to you. but it's almost like every day you're struggling to get out of your bed. You're struggling to make meaning of what's happening. You're looking for somebody to fight with. So you're almost like you're not internally driven at all. You're all externally driven. There is no, your motivation is driven by who can I mess with now, right? So it's almost it's a very negative drive. And it doesn't mean you do negative things. It just simply means that how you're driven is not a positive emotion. It's a negative emotion. It's anger and hate. So you're tapping into that versus tapping into love and service, right? So that kind of is where I was at that time, where I tapped into my ability to compete, and I would compete a lot, and I was really good at it as well. It wasn't that I was bad at it. I was actually really good at it. But I realized that created a tremendous amount of dissatisfaction and started to show up in my personal life, started to show up in my relationships, started to show up in how I operated with my teams. It started to show up in my reality until I realized that that's not the life that I wanted, because I was, yes, really successful, but I was also really alone. I was really, really by myself trying to do whatever I wanted to do without having a greater purpose or a greater meaning. I mean, as a company, we were driven, and I was still driven by that mission and that value. But as a person, I was, it was like dual motives, pretty much. So one of the motive was, yes, I want to do something good for the world, but yes, I want to make sure that people see me doing that good for the world. Yes, I want to make sure people recognize me and appreciate me for it, versus just saying, hey, this is my sole intention, which is a lot more powerful, because then you are not looking for what people see me for, versus you only look for what am I doing for the world, right? So that dialogue kind of drove me for a little while, I would say at least for 2-3 years. And it gave me a lot of success for sure. But about 2 to 3 years ago is when I realized that has driven me into a person I didn't like, a person that I wasn't really appreciative of, the person that I wouldn't want to hang out with, right? Or I would hang out with, but mostly superficially, if I would ever hang out with, right? And that realization, it wasn't like one day I woke up and I realized it, but it was pretty much every single night while I was going to bed. I was just so uncomfortable with who I was or who I was becoming, that it had become very real for me that I definitely did not want this for me for life, right? And that kind of started my journey and my tangent towards saying, what is it that I have to change? And initially it was hard, really, really hard. But thankfully for the coaches that showed up, thankfully for the friends that showed up, thankfully for my life partner that showed up, I could make that transition, and I could switch over from the place of being an unhappy, dissatisfied, mostly angry person, not on the surface but internally, to somebody who's very peaceful, joyous, and really enjoys what he creates. And is able to contribute at the same time, and doesn't really have to feel like, what the heck am I doing, or why is everything so bad, or something like that. Like it's just the place that I'm at is very, very different to the place I was at that time. So that kind of is what I know. It's a really long answer to a really simple question that you asked, but that kind of is what happened once I realized that I've got the goal, but the goal was. I had thought that goal would complete and make me really happy about my life. The goal was just something that was, you can say in a sense, a mean to an end, and the end is really joy.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge you for, it's one thing making a change and taking responsibility for our life when things are going really bad and things are rough, but to make a change and change direction, pursue a different path when things are going well on paper is even tougher. So I want to acknowledge you for making that change and bringing that awareness of like, I don't really like the person that I've become. How can I change this? But I want to shift to goal setting, and obviously that approach didn't work, and we've all heard how, like, with the thing with goal setting, it's not about the goal itself, but who it forces you to become and that kind of thing. But you've spoken about goal setting in a different way recently, and you said that all our lives we're taught to have goals, and then we just chase the next one and the next one, like trying to catch the horizon or our shadow. But what is your alternative way of looking at goal setting?
So firstly, I want to make sure that we understand that I'm not saying goals are bad. what I mean when I say we're chasing goals, and that makes it a weird cycle for us, is the understanding of goals and understanding of why you set goals and what should drive or what type of goals to really set. Cool. So I just want to make sure that people don't confuse what I'm going to say with saying I'm saying don't have goals. Have goals, but know why you have them. So what happened in that transition that I was talking about previously is, of course, I was highly goal driven. I was really good at getting them too. So which was, like you could see with my track record, that I was able to really get whatever goals I would set for myself. But again, with the problem with goals is, so how does a goal get created? Let's go a little bit and think of the diagnosis of where goals really come from, right? Goals are created first sometimes by internal motivation, but most of the times goals are created by external motivation, right? By external motivation, I mean, why do you set let's say a number goal? Let's say if somebody says, I want to make $1 million this year. Where does that goal come from? It's not through logic or you going, I want $1 million. What happens is usually you go and you look at somebody and they say, oh, I made $1 million. And a couple of people that you aspire to be are saying they make $1 million. And you go, I want to make $1 million, right? So what happens in that scenario is you are looking at somebody's external projection and thinking that projection is true to the person because of the number that they generate, right? Or whatever they have communicated and then you have set out to be your goal. But the truth really is that whoever's generating, let's say even $1 million, is theoretically probably generating only X thousand dollars as their profit margin or money that they take home, right? Which works for them, right? It's their drive, their motivation, right? But what happens is when we take somebody else's projection and make it our reality, or try to make it our reality, is now that goal becomes driven by somebody else's projection without taking what internally is doing to them. Because you can never know anybody's internal story. You can only know their external story unless they willingly fully share with you, which nobody does, unless in a private conversation. Does that make sense as of now?
Yeah, gotcha.
Right? So that's firstly where the goals come from. Goals are usually defined by, what am I seeing in the world? What do I want to pick? Let's pick that.
From a place of lack, really.
Yeah. And secondly, it comes from a place of lack of just saying, hey, I don't have enough. I need more. Here you go. Right? So it's always that constant drive of more. Now, there's nothing wrong with asking for more. There's nothing wrong at looking at somebody else and saying, you inspire me. I want to look at what you have, and maybe I want that for my life because I'm inspired by you. Right? But here's the challenge that comes. There is no factor of you, like your true self, in that goal, right? Because both the factors that we talked about is either you feeling that that's not enough what you have, and then so saying, what can I create more? So you're not feeling good enough about yourself, or what does somebody else have that I should have, right? Both of them are not driven by you. To drive a goal by you, what you need to know is what I call a value-based life. And that's the way I like to do what you would say a goal. They're not really goals, they're values that drive you, right? Why do I say, and why do I talk about values that drive you? So what happens as human beings, if you really think about it, we are a set of values, right? The things that we like, the things that we don't like. There's ways we like to live, there are ways we don't like to live, right? There is a set of values that define us. We never write it down. We are not trained to write it down. But if you really write it down, there will be a set of 10, 20, 30 principles that you pretty much live by right now. Some of those principles you might like, some of these principles you might not like, right? Everybody has certain set of principles and values that they have, right? Now, when you look at these values and you go, okay, these are the values that I have. What is it that how is it that I want these values to upgrade? What are the values I don't want in my life? What are the values I want to change? What are the values that I want to live by every single day? Because guess what? Joy is not a destination. Happiness is not a destination. It's every day. It's every day. It's the journey itself. And we all know that, consciously, subconsciously, or we have read it in a book. But everybody knows that there is no one place that you can go to and you'll be finally happy. You're happy every day, right? So if you're trying to go to that place and think that goal's going to give you happiness, that's not going to happen. We know that already. What we know also, or we should know at least, or we should at least try to ponder on, if we don't know it already, is at least try to go and say, hey, how am I happy? What does happiness mean? Is happiness in every day, or will I get happy when I get something, right? Now, values, when clearly defined and lived by every single day, can create joy on everyday basis, can create happiness on an everyday basis. And when that happens, you as a human being shift. Now, yes, you might still set out goals just to become a better version of yourself, just to create progress in life, because also what we don't want is that there is no progress in life, because that's not going to help, which is the confusion that you usually have with people with who go, oh, everyday joy, everyday happiness, but I'm bored of this happiness on day 3. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because like, oh, I got this happiness thing covered, but it doesn't mean inaction. The happiness thing, because happiness is in both the tangents, there's the ups and the downs. That's what creates the joy. You want all of that. So you want to set out something out there, but that's mostly a driver. That's not something that defines you. That's just something that kind of says, hey, that could be a good post to go for, right? Let's try to get there, right? So here are the 3, if I may give 3 kind of segments to really understanding goal setting as I understand it, or as I have implemented in my life. Firstly, don't really set goals that are short term, right? Because what happens is when you set a goal for this year or next 6 months, you are only creating a stressor. You're not really creating something that's a driver. A stressor and a driver, the reason why they're different is because when you set a goal for 6 months to a year, it's too short a time period for you to achieve any goal, especially because you will most likely overestimate what you can do in a year, right? So it's a stressor. So it's not a place that creates joy for you. Yeah, you feel stressed out about it. You're like, holy cow, this is too much. And especially 2 months in, you get really, really anxious about it. And then what happens? Anxiety creates inaction, right? So you don't want a stressor in your life. So you don't want to set out a year-long goal. What you want to set is a 3-year goal, which is the second point. Set a 3 to 5 year goal. Reason why 3 to 5 year goal? It's enough time for you to achieve anything. I was just talking to my wife yesterday evening. We were just looking at a document that she pulled out about 3 years ago, what she had done as an exercise with somebody, where she had set a 5-year goal, which was till year 2019, right? So she pulled out the document. We were just reading it, and we were like, 90% of these items are already done.
Yeah, amazing.
Right? Because it was a 3-year goal. It was it was a 5-year goal. There were like 2 or 3 items that we were like, well, this can still be worked on. But most of the items that were on that sheet were done. But if that was her year-long goal, I guarantee it wouldn't have been done. Because that's not how it like our minds need that space to be able to create that reality. It needs a little bit processing time. But we kind of get like, everybody talks about this year-long goal setting. Is why we end up doing year-long goal setting. Goals are best set if they're in 3 to 5 year time segment, and then you break it down to what needs to happen this year for you to really make it real. But that's a separate conversation. For initial conversation, you don't want to set a year-long goal because it creates anxiety and it creates stress. You want to set 3 to 5 year goals, which is the second point, so you can have the freedom to really create what you want to create and be fluid about it. And if everything goes well, and and I hope everybody who's listening to the call doesn't have to face the situation, but nobody's dying in the next 5 years. We're good. As a world, we're good. Unless something really, really bad happens, we have enough time to create whatever reality we want to create. We don't have to get stressed about our realities. We can create the realities we want, right? And the last point that if I can give as a nugget when you're doing goal settings is think in context of values. Don't think in context of goals or how goals are usually seen, which is numbers, because numbers can't define you, right? And your goals don't define you. What defines you is what's your values, right? What are the values that you live by? What's the principles that you follow? Because that's what creates joy. That's what creates happiness. That's what actually, to be very honest, if you have a number goal, it will create that number goal so much faster. It will give you that flexibility to say no when it's not right. Because otherwise, you will only think from your logical mind. I mean, you think from your logical mind. I have seen enough entrepreneurs, I've seen enough people who think from their mind, it seems all logical, and they hate their lives.
So just going back, it's almost like you still will have 1-year goals, but you don't cap it at that. You start further down the line and allow your mind to kind of run free. And then you bring it back to the 1-year goal once you've kind of dreamed up what you actually want to create, and then make it more practical.
Absolutely. So what you're looking for is a 3-year goal and a 1-year action plan.
Got it.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
So a 3-year goal or a 5-year goal will give you your 1-year action plan. But before you even create your 3 or 5-year goal, at least do a little bit of work and create your values and your principles.
So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up episode 88 of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. And a big thanks to Ajit once again for coming on the show and sharing his wisdom with us. Now, as I mentioned, this was just the first half of our interview with Ajit. That's why we didn't hear the final wrap-up questions that I normally ask the guests. So make sure you tune in next week to catch that part of the interview where we spoke all about the coaching world, the coaching profession, how to become a great coach, and so much more. Now, if you like this one, please share it around with your friends on social media and shoot me a tweet at Bryan Teare to let me know your biggest takeaway. For me, it was the fact that, setting goals, while important, if it's not done the right way, it's still going to lead to, a lack of fulfillment, which is the reason we think we set goals in the first place. Instead, we should get clear on what's important to us, our values, and from that place, set a longer term goal, like 3 to 5 years, and then come back to a 1-year action plan. So 3-year goal, 1-year action plan, based on the things that you care a lot about. And that is when we're going to achieve the fulfillment and the happiness that we really want when we set goals in the first place. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at bryanteare.com/088. But until next week, guys, keep creating your quarter life comeback.